Hello, this is Gideon Six, and today I'm going to talk a bit about democracy, some of the problems that we're having in our democracy, what we can do to fix it. This is based off a recent article I wrote on my Substack called Should We Be Saving Our Democracy? So, just as a disclaimer up front, for those that don't know me, I do not support or identify with any particular uh, national or local political parties. And I avoid doing that as much as possible because I fully believe that we should be electing candidates based on their qualifications, for one. How much experience do they have operating in a bureaucracy? That is important. Also, what policies they have, their character. All these things are very important. But what you find mostly is that the slogans, vote Republican no matter what, straight ticket. If you care about your country, if you care about your kids, vote Democratic no matter what. And that phrase, no matter what, is dangerous. It's insane. Save our democracy at all costs. Well, what does that even mean? In the Constitution, it specifically states that the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a Republican form of government. And I know a lot of people, and even when the Constitution was written, a lot of people use those words, republic and democracy, interchangeably, but that's not accurate, right? Even if you go to the modern form of democracy, which is a representative democracy, there are still some differences that people should be aware of. Mostly that in a republic, you have a very limited amount of representatives. So, and then in a representative democracy, you have a very large amount of representatives, which may sound like a great idea, but what that does is increases the influence and power of factions. Because in a representative democracy, whoever can influence the most people has the most power. People always think, well, in a democracy, every person has political power. And that used to be true. But as groups grow larger, that becomes less and less true. The people who have the power are the people who can afford to have power. The media, major corporations, they send lobbyists, and they influence these politicians more than anybody on your street ever could. So this idea that we need to protect the ability of these politicians to continue to corrupt and degrade our country is insane. It is a slogan. It is dangerous. And I just think people need to be a little bit more mindful of that. Democracy, of course, comes from the words demos and kratos, basically power of the people, based on the ancient Greek city-states. But even then, Socrates, he was killed due to democracy, because what happens, inevitably, democracy lends to tyranny. It leads to socialism. It leads to communism, because people expect more and more power to be given to the central government so that they can protect us. This is why so many of the founders insisted on this nation being a republic, to help protect against these factions from developing. But of course, human nature gets involved, and they start to realize, well, with factions, we have greater access to power, more votes, we can get our agenda taken care of. Still to this day, a lot of people aren't aware that the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, they're private parties. They're ran by private groups and organizations. They don't care about you so much as they care about staying in power. It's all about the party. You're always encouraged to vote along party lines. You're always encouraged to vote straight ticket, right? But that doesn't make sense, because if you're living in a rural area or an urban area, different parts of the state, maybe you're in the mountains, why would you need your candidate to vote the same exact way as a candidate living somewhere else that's different geologically, culturally, economically. It doesn't make sense. So this idea that we still live in a democracy, even a representative one, is insane because that's just not true. These representatives that you are voting are not voting in interest of your specific area. They're voting in interest of the party that they have affiliated themselves with. And I'm not saying anything that's, you know, to me at least is like, wow, how did you know that? It's pretty obvious in the way that they market themselves, the way they talk to each other, even the way they interact with their constituents. So getting back to Socrates, what he was saying was that the more power you lend to the central government, the more powerful and tyrannical they become. And, there's a big history behind it. That would probably be another video, or, tell you what, much smarter people than me have already written this about that subject quite extensively. But he essentially warned about the tyranny, basically unpopular opinions becoming censored, shutting people down, not allowing them to speak when it becomes against what those people in power want. So that's something to be aware of. And we see that with cancel culture in social media. When somebody makes an opinion, COVID, people talking about ways to avoid getting sick or ways to treat yourself, all that led to a lot of people getting shut down on social media and canceled. And be aware that both these national parties are guilty of these things, right? They just have slightly different strategies. Republicans don't want a republic either. The Republicans are perfectly happy to have this democratic representative democracy, because that way they're not going to be held accountable on an individual level. Whereas in a republic, you're only, because of the limited nature of the amount of people in position, you're going to get more highly qualified people. So the Republicans and the Democrats, those are just names, right? They all operate and play the same game. They all use fear as a weapon. The left tends to use your fear of losing security, losing safety, losing money, losing social benefits. The right uses your fear of illegal immigration, communism, socialism to keep you voting with them. And what a lot of people don't realize is whether each side of the aisle, they're usually extremely wealthy. They're usually extremely connected in media and corporations because they all know each other. So, I just had some thoughts, some ways that we could reduce the power of these parties and kind of restore the republic that this country was meant to be. I'm not saying get rid of democracy completely, because that's silly, because the republic and democracy share so many of the same values, at the heart of which is that each citizen has political power. But if you don't claim that power, others are going to claim it for you, which is exactly what has happened over the past 150 years. So the first proposal would be to remove political party affiliations from election ballots. This would force citizens to be more proactive in their choices. Get rid of the straight ticket voting. You need to know what the candidates are about, what their policies are, what their character is, what their qualifications are. No more voting for somebody just because they belong to a certain group that you like. That's a very dangerous road to travel down. The second proposal would be to enable blockchain style voting. The technology already exists. The processes need to be refined, but voting should not be a hassle. You should register one time in your entire life, and it should be as simple as either logging in with your PIN code or your fingerprint. and you should have the choices. You mark your choices. It goes through the blockchain. It's all exceptionally transparent. You cannot cheat the system that way. Stop allowing these politicians to park. If there's a 200-foot restriction, they're at foot number 201, trying to influence people unfairly. The third, make all lobbyist conversations public. Every time a lobbyist meets with any representative of this country, it needs to be a recorded conversation, because the corruption and amount of control that they have takes away your individual political power. Number 4, cap the amount any candidate is allowed to raise. So there's not a whole lot to be done about political action committees. However, we can reduce the amount of time that candidates themselves are allowed to be on commercials or collect donations, at least directly. That thought still needs a lot of work, because then you're playing with freedom of speech, and that is an issue, as are some of these other proposals. 5, remove political party affiliations from all official documents. So any official document that the president signs, or a House committee or anything like that signs, there is no reason to know whether they're a Republican or a Democrat. A law is a law. It doesn't matter if it was signed by a Republican president or a Democrat president. Getting rid of these affiliation tags and voting people based on policy and character, I think it's going to alleviate a lot of our problems. Number 6, force candidates that swear an oath to uphold the rights of all people that they represent. Many times people get in office and they just relentlessly attack the other side. And this leads to number 7. We can end the divisive rhetoric by forcing these officials to agree to a civility agreement where it reduces the amount of inflammatory speech and reinstills dignity. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you again soon.